Number 1. July 30th, 2008, 12:01 p.m. A carnival worker named Tim McLean boarded a Greyhound bus to return home after finishing work at a fair in Alberta, Canada. He sat near the back of the bus, one row apart from the bathroom, and began his long trip home. 7 hours later, at one of the routine stops, another man boarded the bus. The new passenger was a very tall man in his late 40s named Vince Waiguang Lee. Lee initially took a seat in the front, but after a later routine stop, moved to the back of the bus to sit right next to McLean. He politely smiled at him and asked him how he was doing. McLean paid little mind to the company and soon fell asleep in his seat with headphones over his ears and his head rested on the window pane. It isn't clear how much time passed as Lee patiently sat next to McLean, but at some point, eyewitnesses stated that Lee pulled out a large knife and then started stabbing McLean in the neck and chest. One of the other passengers stated that he was disturbed by how calm Lee was as he repeatedly stabbed McLean. He said there was no rage or anything. He was like a robot, stabbing the guy. As soon as the stabbing began, the other passengers broke into an uproar, and the driver swerved off to the side of the road, where himself and the other passengers exited in a panic. Lee then went from stabbing McLean to cutting off his head, completely decapitating him. He then picked up McLean's severed head and proudly displayed it to the evacuated passengers standing outside the window. At some point after that, the driver and a few other men attempted to get back into the bus to recover McLean's body, but were prevented from doing so when Lee slashed the knife at them from the other side of the locked doors. After scaring off any attempt to collect what was left of McLean, Lee then proceeded to cut off small pieces of his flesh and eat them. By the time police were able to arrive on the scene, Lee had been trapped inside the bus, prevented from escaping by the bus driver and an assisting truck driver who had been guarding the doors, armed with a hammer and a crowbar. Lee had previously attempted to escape by simply driving away in the bus, but was stopped by some quick acting by the bus driver, who immediately engaged the bus's immobilizer system, making any of its operations impossible. Many of the other exited passengers sat along the sidewalk. Some were intensely crying, others vomiting. All were visibly shaken by the atrocities they had witnessed. Hours passed with police at a standoff with Lee as he paced back and forth along the aisle of the bus. He continued to periodically eat more and more of McLean's remaining flesh as the surrounding SWAT teams and police negotiator vigilantly watched. Eventually, Lee would try and escape by shattering one of the bus windows and crawling through. He was quickly arrested after being shot twice with a taser gun on his way out. The condition of McLean's body was then investigated, where pieces were found placed in several plastic bags aboard the bus, with his ears, nose, and tongue found stuffed inside Lee's pant pockets. McLean's eyes and a fraction of his heart were never recovered and were presumed to have been eaten by Lee. A psychiatrist appointed to speak with Lee in aid of the following trial said that Lee believed that God's voice had spoken to him, telling him that McLean was a force of evil who was planning to execute him. The only words Lee spoke throughout the trial were his repeated plea for someone to kill him. He was sentenced to a mental health care center. Number 2. Johnthony Walker was a school bus driver in Tennessee. It was a Monday afternoon, and the bus was full of 37 students from Woodmore Elementary, with Walker behind the wheel. Not more than a mile away, after pulling out from the school parking lot, and Walker has accelerated the bus to well over the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit. One of the students aboard stated that Walker wasn't paying attention and was going real fast. Walker reportedly soon turned to look back at the students and ask them, "Are you ready to die?" As he continued to speed down a narrow street, only seconds later, driving the bus straight into a telephone pole and a tree, killing 6 of the students aboard. The mother of one of the students who died in the crash claimed that she'd complained to the school several times about Walker, though school officials have found no records of said complaints. A week prior to the crash, the school had received a letter from the mother of another one of the students with concerns about Walker swearing at her child and suddenly slamming on the brakes, causing many of the students to hit their heads against the seats in front of them or fall out of their seats entirely. Walker was rumored to have a sadistic habit of driving recklessly and slamming on the brakes in a means of disciplining the students when they were misbehaving or irritating him. Records released by the school several days after the crash included statements written by some of the students regarding Walker's behavior prior to the crash. One of the students stated that the bus driver drives fast. It feels like the bus is going to flip over. He makes people go seat to seat, back and forth. And when someone's in the aisle, he stops the bus and makes people hit their head. Another student stated that the bus driver was doing sharp turns, and he made me fly over onto the next seat. We need seatbelts. The case is still ongoing, but there are currently 7 lawsuits open against Walker.